Welcome to the Palm Court Podcast. Mike Palmer here, joined again by Megan, Citron, and Grant Balfour. Welcome back to the show, folks.
I'm
Bye.
Folks, we're happy to see that the second season started. We are now picking up with our second episode, and we are joined today by Dr. Michael Campbell, also known as Mike Campbell. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Hey, everybody. How you doing?
And Mike, we always like to start by getting folks' background and how they connect to New College. You came in around the same time as the rest of us, but then I think you probably had as steady a relationship with New College over the years, which we're going to get into a bit. But however you like to do it, can you just catch us up on who you are and how you connect to New College?
Right. So I am connected to everybody on the screen here in terms of overlapping at New College for sure. I believe that I came in between Grant and Mike, right? Because I came in 87.
Yep, 86.
And
I'm
right.
89.
And,
Yeah,
and
and
you were right.
I'm a legendary class of 88. Yeah.
Right. So we have that serial thing going on the
Which is good for podcasts, Mike. Serial podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
right.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. So I was there from 87 to 91 with you guys doing things as a student. And then after that, I was on the foundation board of trustees when the foundation still had a board of trustees, and the alumni board for a long time. The alumni board, like 15 years. In fact, I stayed on the alumni board till I moved to Barbados. And after about 6 months in Barbados, the Barbados-Sarasota trips were a little challenging to manage. And I also came back to New College to work. And when was that? In 1998, in January, I came back for a postdoc in the counseling center after I finished my PhD at UF and did a year on internship in Wyoming. And so I was in the counseling center for about a year and a half or so and was thinking about other jobs and sort of surprising. It was surprising to me. I wound up being the housing director, God help me. For a few years, they had a failed search and I filled in, and then it sort of dragged on after that. So I was working at New College from 98 to 2005 when I came to
So-
Barbados.
Who did you take over for the housing role? Who left?
The famous Mark Johnson.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I was wondering.
Shortstop extraordinaire for the New College Bones. Yeah.
Well, actually, so Mark was there. That is partially true because the roles kept changing. Tim Richardson had also been there filling in after Mark left. So you guys probably don't remember Tim Richardson, but that sort of mid to late 90s generation will remember Tim. So Mark and Tim were both actually really, New College has had a somewhat checkered history with student affairs professionals, but Mark and Tim were both excellent. And so, yeah, my job when I was there was Mark Johnson's job when we were there.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So you would found people who were supposed to be out of the dorms and you would make sure we paid for broken windows. That's what I remember was Mark's job.
There was some of that. There was, hopefully in constructive ways, right? Constructive engagement. Sort of a challenging job, but actually in some ways rewarding, not what I thought I would be doing.
Yeah.
And I was teaching during that time too. So it was kind of I was doing some psychology teaching and also occasionally having to talk to people about their pets.
And then also you touched on it, but behavioral health has been a through line really starting at New College and then professionally really right up until now. Can you catch us up a little more on your professional background?
Yeah, so it's slightly circuitous. So after New College, I did a master's degree in geography, actually. And so I was at FSU for a couple of years and thought maybe I was headed toward diplomatic service. And actually, in terms of research, was interested in environmental behavioral geography, and then went back to clinical training and did a PhD in counseling psych at UF. So that's why I was back for the postdoc, right? That was all to get licensed in Florida. And somewhat, not really, I have to say, it's not like I had a very well-developed life plan. But it turns out these days that after 19 years in Barbados in a medical faculty, that my research and even my clinical and public service interests have a lot to do with vulnerability and resilience in small island developing states and climate mental health and disaster response and those kinds of things. So
Mm.
somehow those things all kind of work together in ways that were not consciously planned.
Yeah. And then another connection is that you're a homeowner in the Uplands area.
That is true. I bought a house in the Uplands, just kitty corner from what is now the cop shop, what used to be the counseling center, in fall of 2021.
Okay.
So kind of right in the middle of COVID, which was fortuitous. There are not many fortuitous things about COVID, but the property values in Sarasota were one of the things.
Hmm.
So the price was pretty good. And, I knew the neighbor, lots of new college people still in the neighborhood. And, I kept inherited my parents' house in upstate New York, but I am not retiring in upstate New York. And Florida makes a lot more sense as a US base if you're living in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so, there was the opportunity. I bought it and I really liked the house. I wish, that the neighborhood dynamics were slightly different with what's happening at New College and some, fewer natural disasters would be nice too. But
Sure.
Have you
Speaking of
seen the
resilience,
area? Have you seen the Bayfront in the Uplands area? Have you been back since the
I haven't been back. I was actually working remotely for July and August. So that is the last time I was there for an
So you
extended.
did see the destruction, that the school wrought in that area then?
Yes, just yeah, not the nature destruction, the political destruction. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
And in fact, there are, these things are so contextual, right? And sort of the valence if somebody else had put them up. It's interesting. And even I'm not very active, but I'm on the mailing list, for the neighborhood association. And it's interesting to see all the sort of social processes as the neighborhood reacts. So one of the things is, those of us on that part of Parkview can now see batting cages from our which is kind of unusual, but batting cages don't necessarily have to be aversive, right? And so, it's a lesson having done so when I was, at New College in various roles, and I lived on 58th Street, some of you will remember, and in what is now the daycare center, which arguably needed about the same amount of adult supervision when I was there. But there were all the issues there, right? Because the neighbors were concerned about the road and what was going on in B dorm
Right.
Yeah,
and
it was kind of a buffer area in between.
and there were, some people who were really well-meaning helped make that relationship work. Like if you'll remember General and Mrs. Knight on the corner,
Mhm.
they kind of connected with B dorm students and wound up, hosting barbecues and things, and people knew each other. And when I was, in administration, we did all kinds of, outreach, talk to the neighbors, make sure we communicate, involve people in the master planning process, all of those things. And, that model seems a little antiquated these
Yeah.
days. So that, it's different. But having said that, it's still a nice neighborhood. It's just a little less certain. And the airport development is another sort of dynamic.
And then the
Right.
USF stuff on the other side, right? You're kind of getting squeezed
Yeah.
from both sides. I wonder, are the neighbors, did they see any of this coming, or are they just in shock that it's gone this direction?
I think there's a range because some of the people are pretty new. And so they, didn't have a history or, pick up on nuances. Others, of course, have been there since way before we were students and have, kind of grown up with the college. I think they're seeing more now, and there's not a unanimity of sort of ideological, political opinion either. Although haven't seen any, nobody is tussling in the street or anything, but people have different thoughts about Corcoran and DeSantis. But generally speaking, the issue around communication with the college and understanding the impact on the neighborhood and, how do people plan for managing their house, whether they want to sell or buy, whether they want to leave it to their kids, whether, all of
Yeah.
those things are certainly
Yeah. I mean, some of the plans are so grandiose, like the Freedom Institute, that's the size of a football field and several stories high that they want to put right in front of your neighborhood.
Yes, although that thing seems to be kind of a quantum institute in the sense that it's on some master plan, and then you look at the other drawing and it's not there. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, that's, honestly, the other thing that so much seems certainly the process is opaque. And my impression from the periphery is also marked by it's also very impulsive.
Right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
extremely well funded at the same time. Things actually do happen.
Well, that seems to be true, but in some respects, like certainly in terms of
Yeah.
legislative allocations in the last couple of years, but legislators and the board of governors are asking more questions about how those allocations are being spent.
Right.
And so I don't think that is a gravy train without limits.
Yeah. The faucet was turned on and now folks are
Yeah,
asking where all the water is going. Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Although the water may be bad analogy considering. And then you're still involved in different capacities with the new NCA. Can you catch us up a little bit on more of some of those ways in which you're intersecting with New College?
So I am a member of the board of directors of the Noble Collegiate Alliance, which is one of the new groups. I think that situation is stabilizing a little bit in the sense that New College Freedom is doing their thing and kind of has clarified their mission. And we now have our 501(c)(3) and, are moving forward. And of course, there are other less formal groups and the Sunday conference calls and all of those things going on. There's been a lot of alum reaction, which is, both encouraging, but also a little confusing. Right.
Yeah.
So I think some of that is sort of sorting itself out. And I have been part of the NCA group in part because for a long time now, before the takeover, my personal opinion is that the Alumni Association was much more effective when we were independent. And
You mean when the
uh,
Alumni Association was independent, not the school being
yes,
independent? Because I think the two
uh,
things were, like,
yes,
opposed each
right. Well,
other.
that's true. We should be clear when the Alumni Association was independent.
Right. We had
And
our own publications. We were able to
yes,
control our own communications.
and the thing that's really confusing is that the Alumni Association became more dependent after the college became independent.
Yeah, that's what I was
Uh,
getting at.
It was
yes,
kind of like
yeah,
a
yeah.
little switcheroo happened there. Can you explain to us how that happened shortly? Because I know it's very complex, but I think a lot of people don't understand how the Association lost its independence.
I can give you my précis. Others would have, probably some different vantage points on this, but I was president of the Alumni Association when we merged with the foundation. Actually, my name is on the document. I signed it on the back of Jim Harmon's Mazda. It was true. He was running to the meeting. He's like, "Can you sign this? We got the thing up."
Was it the hood? And was it still hot or was it the trunk? Like which part of the car are we
If I
talking about?
recall, it was the trunk and it was cold. But,
Okay.
I don't have like an eidetic memory of that, but I think it was the trunk.
Excellent.
And so, we had worked on this affiliation. Actually, it's an affiliation agreement. That is the formal title of it. And Larry Vernalia, who many of you know, all of you know, actually, who was an attorney and was secretary at the time, did a lot of heavy lifting, and we put that together. And importantly, the Alum Association affiliated with New College Foundation as a private, independent, not for profit, not as a DSO. And, our thinking at the time with independence was actually the future of the foundation is that the Alum Association is gonna, the merger is gonna be more the alums sort of demographically maturing, will have greater influence, and the future is gonna be, like rainbows and puppy dogs and all of that. But the future was not all rainbows and cuddly things. And shortly after that, within a year or maybe actually 2 or 3 years, because I was in Barbados by that time, the foundation opted to voluntarily reform as a DSO organization. And so with that, and by the way, the alums objected, we formally objected in writing. We at least said, we think this should be a more considered decision. There may be downsides. And there were a lot of people who thought that now that New College was the youngest, member of the SUS, that we needed to be, a good citizen, kind of. I'm probably not doing justice to their argument, but that was sort of the idea. We need to look like the others. We need to do all those things. And so that happened, and fairly soon, not like flipping a switch, but fairly soon after that, first of all, issues around sunshine law stuff. And even though our original affiliation agreement stipulated things like the independence of the nimbus and preservation of our core programs, the student grants and faculty development and things that we had done, it turned out that those became budget requests of the DSO Foundation. And I think very importantly that things have reached the point of why I would go and continue this way, that the alum board can't meet except in publicly noticed meetings with the same sort of structures like board of governors or trustees, which essentially means you can't really discuss anything in a creative way. And, meetings are short and structured and disproportionately oriented toward consent agendas and items,
Very
right?
not
And
New College. The whole
yeah.
thing.
And we, like both extremes have some limitations. In the old days, we used to meet for like 15 hours on a weekend with the alumni board, and it was probably a little much, right?
Were you playing Dungeons and Dragons, or what were you doing for 15 hours?
We should have been. We did a lot of things in those 15 hours. But, among other things, to put in sort of a plug for a classic alumni association, we endowed the J professorship in math.
Yeah.
We reached in our best years pretty consistently about 50% annual giving rates, which is fantastic compared to our peer institutions. And, we had several $100,000 in board designated endowments and assets when we merged the foundation. And in fact, those endowments were really basically sort of putting away our carry forward money for a rainy day, right? It was because we were small, of course, to start, as you know, right? And so it was, it was pretty remarkable what our scrappy little alum association did. And partly because we had the, freedom to be able to do that. And that has been harder. The reality is that this aspiration that the foundation has had, even before the current changeover of, we're going to do development campaigns and have tremendous successes, that has not materialized to the extent. I mean, there have been some, it's not that they haven't accomplished anything, but not at the scale that they, I think, anticipated. And certainly the alum contribution, which, should have been growing, has not been doing, even before the takeover again. And of
Yeah.
course, precipitously dropped after.
There used to be a kind of a tradition where they would have the students call us every year, and you would get those calls. And
I
when
love
was
those
the last
calls.
time? Me too. It was always fun because it was a way you kind of got back in touch with somebody who was at the school, and they were always really funny and interesting people.
Yeah.
And when was the last time they did something like that? Even before it kind of dropped off at some point.
That's a good question. I am not entirely sure. I have gotten set, well, I mean, been 19 years, so it could have been a while ago, but I've set in Barbados. I have had some outreach from students, but not in the same way that we used to
No.
do it. As when we were involved, we'd all be there with, like bringing pizzas to the students, and then be hanging out in College Hall, calling people, all of that kind of thing. And it was fun. And this is a little more structured. Now, I do know, and this is, nationally a thing, right? Phonathons don't work with people who aren't answering their phones.
Right.
And so obviously, I think if we were really going to do this in an effective way now, going forward, we'd have to think about, how to do that, whether it's
Yeah.
sort of texting people to say, when can you take a call, or whether it's
Mhm.
reaching out on social media and saying, you want to talk to a student, you can
Yeah.
call up.
It was very much something Pat Oker was focused on, was the alumni giving rate. Because I do remember when she came up, I met her right before she was ousted. She was hosting an alum happy hour here in Manhattan in New York. And, she was being pretty transparent about the metrics you're talking about, Mike, where it's one of the things you're measured on, even if it's a small donation, just the fact that you're engaging with each individual alum and the percentage of them that are giving back is something that it's an important thing to keep track of. And then obviously, January of 23, everything shifted. Where were you? How did that all impact you? What was your perspective on the takeover and everything that happened, since then?
right? Where were you? That's like one of those flashbulb crisis memory kind of
Yeah.
things. Where were you when you heard that?
Well, the other one
Uh,
we talked about on the show is 9/11, and it sounds like you were at New College for that as well. So like that was the other.
I was right next door to Air Force One on
Yeah.
tarmac.
But how about the
Um,
second flashbulb, the more
yeah,
recent
we'll do the
flashbulb?
second one first. So I was here. And I also, had interacted with Pat Oker. In fact, after I bought the house, I was back and forth and I had met with her 2 or 3 times in College Hall at her office. And exactly that, those kind of constructive conversations, right? What can we do to re-engage alums? We had what you guys will appreciate too, because they were hiring some police and we had a
Mm.
extended conversation about the benefits of hiring retired. Maybe they don't have to be NYPD, but those kind of, and NYPD is
Yeah.
helpful, right?
This was
We had lots of
the Hugh Rorty initiative. Is that what you call
right.
it?
This was the Rorty. This was yes, right. This is the Rorty
Henrietta
model.
Fund. Yeah.
The Rorty, Henrietta, Vickers. Vickers is a little after for you guys, but also one of those legendary New York
Yep.
cops. And the idea of how great it is to have very experienced law enforcement people with judgment who also think in very kind of protective and nurturing
Yeah.
ways about students who could be their kids or their grandkids, and how that sort of shapes what they do and how they interact. And like a lot of other things at New College, really punch above their weight because you would know
Mhm.
that like you've already was an undercover narcotics detective for years, right? And can size up a lot of things, right? When he's, hanging
Definitely
off.
didn't seem impressed by anything we were doing.
Yeah.
You could tell.
Right.
Yeah. He had our numbers. Maybe
Right.
bad. Like,
Right. If anything, really worrisome, like, okay, that's
yeah.
worrisome. We'll deal with that. Anyway, just all of those sorts of things, right? That where she was, I think, really genuinely taking the time to engage and learn and think about how to build on strengths. And the reality is that, things have not been great at New College for a while before she
Yeah.
came. So that was the other, like, really, what is the, what is the corrective action plan here? So that was the context. And I think the first thing that I saw, there was some buzz with alum friends and all that. And, lots of us know Bob Allen. I know Bob Allen for years, and I'll say publicly, I still count Bob Allen as a friend. I don't, support his behavior, but I do remember when we worked together to do a lot of things for the
I mean, you
college.
live in Barbados. You may need a yacht at some point.
And there are yachts here all the time. I'm not usually on them. Although I did get to go on the Scientologist boat a couple of years
Oh,
ago.
nice.
You
Oh,
were?
There all the time. So that's kind of interesting. That's another story because that was interesting
Three
enough to
wins.
like.
That sounds like bonus content. We'll see if we can
Okay,
get to
yeah, we'll
that.
have
Yeah,
to-
yeah. All right.
Hopefully after
Um,
the asbestos remediation.
Oh, right. There's that. Well, somehow asbestos and Scientologists seem to go together.
They do.
Oh, that's right. Because I was thinking about New College asbestos remediation, which I was also involved in.
Yep.
But that's right. The boat had the
Yeah.
asbestos.
Uh,
I was there after the asbestos. I
Let's
think.
just-
I
let's
don't know
just-
how well they did.
Let's do as best as we can. Okay, Mike.
Oh, yeah. God.
I should just get myself out.
I'm desperately trying to come up with another asbestos pun and I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I heard, I thought, so my first impression was, and if you remember, like Pat Oker sent that letter saying something like, I really welcome these new board members.
Yeah.
It's been not good for the college that we've had these vacancies that persisted so long.
Yep.
That part is probably generically true. But I remember thinking this is the sort of statement like, Comrade Gorbachev is resting in his DACA or that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Like, what is happening here? And I don't know, I did not talk to her about that. Fairly shortly thereafter, I communicated to say, wow,
Yeah.
thanks for all you've been trying to do, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. But I didn't, talk to her in great detail about her reaction.
Yeah.
But it was, well, no kidding. It was pretty clear what was going on because the press releases and the governor's press secretary, it was pretty
Yeah.
obvious what it was. I guess I'm the guest, but I'm interested in what you all think because we're, kind of the same era. What really struck me, and I have to say it strikes me about a lot of sort of rhetorical devices that politicians are using these days. Talk about creating a problem and creating an enemy that just wasn't.
Yeah.
Now, I do think And, over the years, I guess I'm pretty ecumenical ideologically, right? I've had lots of, well, just the fact that I've had any number of Republican and kind of
Right.
conservative New College friends, right? It's not like they weren't around.
Right.
Yeah.
Even
Uh,
when we were all at New College together, I would say your group was probably one of the more conservative ones, like as
Yeah.
much as we thought of things that
Yeah,
way,
at least some of them. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't, I don't think
They
we
would have
really thought
ID'd
about
as
it.
conservative then. I don't know if they would now anymore, but probably not.
Conservative has
Um,
changed, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, some of those, that group of friends were conservative sort of by default because they had been in the military before they came to college on
Right.
GI Bill. And that's sort of one dimension, but they weren't really, they weren't John Birch Society, I
Yeah.
would say.
Sure.
Were
Uh,
Were you involved with the frat?
yes, but I feel
I remember you
compelled
being
almost
involved.
reflexively to say that it was a joke.
Were
I
you
know
in
there
for
was,
the Lorax Rebellion? I was gonna
yeah,
ask. Okay. What are
that
your
was my
memories
first
of
year.
Yeah.
That was my first year, because that was spring of '88. Yeah,
Right.
academic year 87, 88,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
was
Mhm.
like
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
second semester,
Were
right?
you
Correct.
involved at
Yeah.
all,
Around
or
April.
I was around. I remember going out there. I didn't get hauled away by the cops, but I was there when it was going on. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I didn't chain myself to a tree either, but I was, I was there supporting.
We did have Jonathan White on to talk about his experience there. We did get Merlin's take
Susan Hirschberg?
and Susan
Yeah.
Hirschberg,
Right.
who all were kind of more principles. But if this was, I'm a Kurosawa fan, if this was Rashomon, you would be like just a guy there, like a guy
Yeah.
who was just
Yeah,
kind of
no, I
watching
was.
it.
I was like in the crowd. I was,
Yeah.
it was, I particularly as a first year sort of finding
Yeah.
my, ways to navigate socially, and was sort of interested, but not still figuring out how to engage kind
Were
of.
you aware of that space? Did you go and look at all the trees and the art? I guess there was artwork kind of integrated into the trees.
Yeah, there was. And well, and of course, Doplin's racquetball court was sort of in
Yeah.
that general direction. Like
Mhm.
there was a whole
Yeah.
sort of more kind of psychedelic-y part of campus where you go wander around and have.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did a lot of wandering around when I got on campus, and I was familiar with the area. And, it was really nice. And then, of course, later on, like shortly after that, there was some oak tree planting in other places, like
Yeah.
Justin Bloom and that group planted around the berm. And so there was it was interesting that I was kind of trying to reclaim parts of the space and reshape it, which I thought about later as a geographer. Doing
Yeah,
like
Oh,
how,
yeah. Of course. Yeah.
We did have John O. Miller on talking about all the different ways in which he's kind of intersected with the physical plan of campus and how trees, circling back also to the uplands conversation, how trees and their removal and their planting have been kind of a central theme in
Yeah.
the history of the school.
yeah, and the sort of significance of space, right? Humanistic
Mm.
geographers write about sacred spaces and all that.
Yeah.
I wrote a really good paper in grad school that I have lost, that I wish I had kept, about the importance of the bayfront,
Yeah.
right? And the meaning of the space, everything from burying the Harvard dirt is a symbolic
Oh,
thing,
right.
and how so many important sort of milestones, not just graduations, but people come to weddings and the pictures with families and, all of
Wait,
that.
what is this
And
about burying the Harvard dirt? What is this?
I think it's still on YouTube. There are videos of the Harvard dirt burial. So in somewhere between 1960 and 64, probably
early.
64, because nobody was really there,
Oh, yeah.
when it was founded. They actually brought dirt from Harvard to bury, to symbolize, right? This was the connection of New College to,
Yeah. There's
to
Oxford and Harvard, I think they got dirt from.
That's a
Well,
very empty
but
set
what was it
phenomenon.
for?
Burying dirt is a
Yeah, it
very
was-
meta kind of thing.
So
Yeah.
that we can spring
Yeah.
from it, or are we
Yeah.
trying to bury it and keep it down there?
No,
I'm-
it was a planting. It was a
It's possible that actually a lot of people from Harvard came to Florida to get away from the trouble that they had in Boston. Actually, in those days, there could have been, right, a lot of dirt burying. But I think at least the part on YouTube was much more of the sort of pomp and circumstance. We are, consecrating New
Yes.
College in a way
Sacred
with
space.
this Ivy League mojo. So yes, I mean, there's all of that, and including, difficult topics, but like suicides on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Bayfront. right? I mean, very, very meaningful things and sort of across the spectrum of things that are meaningful. And thinking about then, bulldozing landscape without notice, sort of that resonates in a different way apart from the sort of, mangrove ecology,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I still can't get over the fire ring being where it is. That's crazy to me.
Mm.
It's still like, ugh.
Why couldn't you put it by the side of the pool? Like it would go, it could kind of go
Exactly.
there.
Yeah. What do they do at a residence inn? Don't overthink it.
Right.
But
In
Mike, we're talking about a paper you wrote. We haven't asked you yet what your thesis was about. Can you share with us what your thesis was on?
Well, my thesis was on drinking behavior in Mexican migrant workers, immigrant
Oh,
migrant workers, and the shifts in kind of patterns as as people stay, they're like culturated. So I was a psych and Latin American studies
Yeah.
major, psych slash Latin American studies major. So I was doing both those things, and so it was slightly kind of an anthro, even though I think I only had
yeah.
archaeology as an
Were you
anthropology, but I spent a
Did you
lot of
do
time like
field work out in the
And
communities that were kind of in
I
the
did.
Mhm.
I did, in fact, in landscapes that don't exist anymore.
Yes,
Remember the
I went out
celery
there
fields?
too. Yes,
yeah.
I went out there as well
Oh,
doing
right,
work. I was thinking about that. I looked at it on Google Maps and you're right. It's all gone. Those tomato
right.
farms and
Yeah, no, it's like strip malls with, targets in them and stuff now. Right?
you studied under Charlene?
Shar, I sort of toggled back and forth for sponsorship between Terry Pauls and Shar Callahan.
Mhm.
And in the early days, Jim Roth, Mike, you'll definitely remember Jim Grant.
Jim
I
was
remember
great.
Jim.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yeah.
And even at the end, I think Shar was Terry was my contract sponsor. Shar was my thesis sponsor. Tony Andrews was on my committee too, because he had
Mhm.
spent a lot of time drinking with Mexicans.
So what was your big conclusion?
Well, it turns out that, and admittedly, I was not the only one to observe this. Other people had written about it, but the interesting sort of cultural piece is that the American pattern of let's go for happy hour, right, is sort of let's go maybe every day or several days a week,
Yeah.
depending on the person, right? 1, 2, 3. But,
Yeah.
a sort of time limited thing. And then you're now, it's dinner, or little league, or whatever else you're going to
Yeah.
next.
Yeah.
Whereas, sort of culturally, in Mexico, in the Caribbean for that matter, too, at least in certain communities, right? Like it's sort of batten down the hatches. We're going all day when you
That
start,
sounds like
right?
Spain as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
marathon.
And so, if you're doing that and it's sort of a Saturday thing or a limited, right? But where people would be at risk, right, for getting into trouble is now they're kind of going out. Maybe they are in an office where they have a more American pad. And even, even
Yeah.
in the sort of agricultural work sphere, if your supervisors inviting you out and they're married or that kind of thing, now all of a sudden it's 3 or 4 times a week. And if you don't
Pace yourself.
just to the 2 or 3 drink kind of thing,
Yeah.
then there's obviously some risk there. That was probably the main.
Yeah.
That's definitely the take home point that I remember 30 years later.
I
Yeah.
spent some time with the English tabloid journalists where it's just a marathon every day at lunch,
Yes.
but I would not recommend that to anyone. Does
Yeah.
not lead to good long-term outcomes. Good headlines.
Lunch conversations are probably pretty entertaining, at least to a certain point. But I don't know.
Yeah.
The rest of the day.
Yeah. The rest of the day gets rough.
This
I
is
have something I want to ask you, Mike. I mean, it's kind of an obvious question, but why did you stay so engaged with New College? What was it? What did the school mean to you? Why did you do that?
that in itself is an interesting question, would be an interesting study that's probably not very broadly interested unless we have the,
Yeah.
New College Journal of New College Alum Studies, because there's a real variation. And although the people who had a positive experience tend to really resonate, that not everybody did. And the kind of experimental, there's a lot about New College historically that didn't necessarily kind of lead you through. Like some people, exited. Having said that, I know lots of people who even, might have left after a year or two to do something, but it was a positive change and they still are connected socially and in other ways. Like there's a real range. I would say, part of it, well, for one thing, attachments that you make when you're 17 or 18 to start
Yeah.
tend to be pretty foundational. So that's true. And some of it was kind of incremental because I was continuously kind of engaged through grad school because I was, foundation board, then the alumni board. And so I was sort of back frequently. So there was, you always feel connected. And the other thing for people, certainly I think through our era in New College, it was small enough that you knew everybody, right? The charter faculty were still there. The charter class people were like in their 40s, when we were
Mm.
students. And so that sense of really sort of connecting to the whole history and understanding the foundation and getting to know the people whose like names are on the buildings, all of that is a pretty powerful thing that I think is, harder in other
Yeah.
places. And I don't know, obviously the takeover has changed a lot, but even before that, right, that sort of personal continuity would be harder.
And what about the boards that you've been on? Any advice? You probably have the most experience across the varied boards that have been connected to New College over the years. And now we're sort of in this new phase where a lot of the quote unquote resistance is happening through these new formations that are out there. Any perspective, any, advice or ideas? It does sound like one takeaway from all of this is the power of these boards where, clearly the governor understood that and that has had a profound influence on the trajectory of the school. But, you're probably as connected to all this stuff as anyone. I'd love to hear a little from you on that.
You know, this is a profoundly difficult situation for the college, right? And I think there's two things. The state higher ed governance has changed quite a bit and has become considerably more, centralized would be a sort of neutral word to say. And, and
Politicized would probably be a less neutral word, but
but accurate. Well, and there are some other even less neutral words that are also probably accurate. And, I'm not really trying to mince words here. My own sort of take on this is that, and it's really probably my personality too, as much as anything, is I don't think that being gratuitously attacking is
No.
helpful, in part also just because that just escalates polarization. But having said that, right, the express very clearly articulated rhetoric from the beginning, all the over the walls
Yeah.
and
That's
the
the
indoctrination.
takeover.
and the real misrepresentation of gender studies is the other thing too. Like our behavioral endocrinologist was part of the gender studies faculty because they studied, you know,
Yeah.
gender differences in endocrinology. And they,
What
the gender
hormones do.
studies faculty didn't all agree. Some of the New College gender studies faculty were pretty biologically driven. I've had several conversations with this, with Gordon Bauer, among others, who is somebody who knows a lot about behavioral genetics. And, it was sort of, it was not the, only, Marcuse gender studies, whatever it
Yeah.
was. That just it wasn't what was happening. And for that matter, if you think about Amy Reed and not only how she's conducted herself in the last couple of years, but how she was as a colleague and a teacher at New College, part of the success of gender studies is that Amy had the sort of social skills and the diplomacy to bring people in and other faculty members, even if they only kind of taught one course. It wasn't gender studies, taking over the college. It was people in different disciplines kind of engaging with Amy, who's very inviting to say, my course could fit into this, or I see how I could add something to that student's thesis committee.
Mhm.
And it just, having said that, and I do think that this is an important part, but I don't think it's unique to New College. Have there been examples of intolerance of conservative ideas? Yeah. Have students been, unkind to students who didn't, the forum wasn't there when we were students and I was not, when I was there teaching or as an admin, I wasn't participating in it, but I certainly did conversations. Were there some toxic things that happened? Were there, conflicts on campus? There were. I think some of them are unfortunate. Mike Michelson, so this was sort of starting, it reflects a national trend on campuses,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it was starting when Mike was there, and Mike was sort of more proactive in addressing it. Very specifically talked about civil discourse. I remember you'll probably heard his quote, right? Freedom is not license, right?
Yeah.
And let's think about it kind of intentionally how we talk to each other and ways in which we share ideas and sharing ideas in ways that aren't alienating and all of those things. And I don't want to, I guess, overly personalize things, but after Mike left, New College really had an extended period of malaise. And
Yeah.
I think at a time that was very difficult in higher education. And so I think campus suffered. It certainly suffered in terms of funding and say, look at the condition of the dorms and all of that. But also, I think in terms of campus climate. I say that from the periphery, at risk of sounding like a pontificating alum who thinks he
Right.
knows all things, right? And so I don't really want to do that, but that's an impression. And so, in a sense, some of the sort of rhetorical justification for what has happened now is not entirely without an evidence base for things that existed. But I really don't think, having been connected enough, that they were of sufficient magnitude to, well, it's hard to know what would justify this, but it just wasn't that bad. And this is certainly not the solution.
And we had
Um,
just gotten somebody through a presidential search. She was just hitting the ground. She was just getting started. She never even got a chance to turn
Yeah.
things
10
around.
months, I think. Is that it?
yeah, yeah, about that. Well, I guess, she's still in the faculty, but yeah, not influencing.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose they could elect her head of the faculty and send her as a trustee. That would be, but I wouldn't really wish that on her.
Yeah.
I think that is what has happened. And so how to kind of engage events in a way that might lead to a future New College that is recognizable to those of us with experience with New College is an important question.
Mhm.
Does the NCA have thoughts about that as an institution or as a group that, continuing the New College project?
I think we do. And that's, some of that's reflected in our mission statement about supporting the initial, goals, ideals of the college. So I wouldn't presume to speak for everybody. I can tell you, if I were to summarize my thought about this, it is that even baseline New College would have benefited from an independent alumni association. So that is worth doing regardless.
Mhm.
And if the college survives in recognizable form, then an independent alumni group can kind of engage in ways that are constructive and see how the situation, and I hope that that's true. But if the college does not survive in recognizable form, at least for a while, there will be a larger than it used to be group of New College alums who probably would want to stay connected and have reunions and other things, right?
Mhm.
For as long as that lasts. So it's kind of like the Pearl Harbor Association or something that we would have. But either way, there's a function for that group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And maybe we'll all start a school somewhere else. Who knows? It could be.
Well, at least continue a podcast, Mike. At a minimum, we have
Right?
a podcast to hang our hat on. It's been an amazing conversation. I think we're getting close to time here. So I don't know if Megan or Grant, if you have any final questions for Mike. And Mike, thank you for our service really throughout. That's one thing we've been
Yeah.
able to say to many of our guests. I do appreciate the opportunity to at least speak for, folks out there in the world. Like you've been doing really yeoman. I don't even know what that means, but you've been doing
Yeah.
it yeoman like
Yeoman's work. Yeah.
yeah, yeoman's work over the years. Thank you for staying connected, really, as we continue into this turbulent phase. But any final thoughts, questions from Megan or Grant?
I have a question. It
Yeah.
might be too big for a final question. I'm not sure. But do you ever play the counterfactual game? Looking back, you've been involved administratively in New College since basically the end of the 90s, right? What could have happened differently that would have led somewhere better, like through that 25-year period?
This is definitely an editorial comment. My sense is that actually at the time of independence,
Mm-hmm.
the fork in the road that we took, right? I think that collectively if we had been more intentional. There were other constraints, fiscal and political and all of that, but sort of more intentional about what an independent new college would look like in the SUS and advocating for that, as opposed to we have to sort of fit into the state university system like a good citizen. And of course, there are certain things that we did have to do, right, to do that. But thinking about within what the givens are that we had to do, right? And thinking more aspirational about what we wanted to be.
Right.
And the other thing, which, talk about a counterfactual, but what would our future with USF have been
Yeah.
like? As
Mm.
Judy Genshaft really wanted to keep New College. We talked about it personally. I saw her tear up in meetings, and I don't think they were crocodile tears.
Yeah.
And she had come, I think, from SUNY Binghamton, something like that, with liberal arts.
Mhm.
She was not. She was somebody with a background. I think she's a psychologist too, maybe an educational psychologist. But she was, somebody who appreciated a lot of the things that we did. And when she retired from USF, she gave, at least at the time, what was, I believe, the largest gift by a university president to their institution, and it was in support of the USF Honors College. So in the parallel universe where New College was the premier, what would have happened is interesting. And I do think in retrospect, and by the way, sometimes the future is the past, right?
Right.
Any last thoughts, Megan, before we wrap up?
I think it's just so incredible, you and Jono and some of the other people, how engaged you stayed with the school. I think the rest of us kind of came and went or stayed with our little friend groups, but you stayed with the institution in a way that, the rest of us didn't. And you're important because you have all this institutional knowledge about this, and it's most of it's not written down anywhere. So I think it's just important to stay engaged and keep talking to people, and we'll see what happens, maybe, you could have a key part to play, just
And
knowing.
and interestingly, a lot of us have been drawn back in now that we're under attack. Like it has been a way to
So,
kind of strengthen
yeah.
the connections
Are
among the
you
alums.
surprised by that, Mike? Like how much the alums have sustained this anger and energy that we have?
I
And
Not completely. I have been, encouraged by a lot of it. But interestingly, we have gotten feedback from other people involved nationally in higher ed and things that, the New College effort is pretty remarkable. I forget. So I heard about this conversation secondhand, and I'm forgetting who it was giving the feedback. But the gist of the conversation was, this has happened with less publicity, maybe, but in other states and other parts of the country. And, after a month or two, sort of, that's
peters
it,
out.
right? The new model has taken over, and that's it. And New College has been tenacious, persistent. This reminds me of Bob Johnson's suggestion for the New College mascot at Independence, which was the fire ant.
Yeah,
Right? Can't get rid of them. They're annoying, but they keep coming back.
especially for those barefooted hippies. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So concluding thoughts, Mike, just in summation.
My concluding thoughts are actually, thanks for your compliments, but thanks to you guys, right? I think that this podcast is one of the most, it's enjoyable and engaging to watch. It's been interesting to see the alums connected and all of that, but it is also kind of a living history museum of people and the college and why people are still engaged and what you all are doing and contributing to the world and what your guests are doing and contributing to the world. That should be, I wish that were a more effective message to the current leadership of the college, but it is an effective message to the world.
Amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Dr. Mike Campbell out of Barbados. We didn't even get to, are there monkeys on your porch right now?
No monkeys yet. They do usually come this time of day, but
All
they
right.
might
Well,
be
we-
delayed.
We may need to have you back on when the monkeys are there. Thanks again, Mike, for joining us on today's show.
All right, everybody, take care.
And for listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. Thanks as always to Grant and Megan. We'll be back again soon. This is the Palm Court Podcast.